And this is kind of one of those things where your body is going to tell you when it becomes uncomfortable. So you can absolutely forward fold, but you'll want to invite a little more space into your forward folds. So if you were super bendy before pregnancy and could touch your toes, now you're probably not going to be able to touch your toes. A lot of people struggle to put their shoes on and socks on towards the end of pregnancy, and that is okay. But even practicing forward folding and practicing it with a little bit of a bend in the knees can help you to stay mobile, to do those things like put shoes on, touch toes, all of that, put socks on towards the end of pregnancy. So it can be helpful for day-to-day life. And welcome to the Coffee Witching Hour. My name is Lacey. This is my podcast. It's all about birth, yoga, raising kind humans, all of those things. I'm laughing because I have one of my tiny little human right back there who's giggling at me as I'm recording this. But we'll try to make sure we keep the distraction level down. So today we are going to be talking about something that I love. We're going to be talking about prenatal yoga. Apologies for my voice. As I'm talking, I'm realizing my voice might sound a little bit rough coming out of the podcast. I have a little cold, so apologies about that in advance. But we are going to be talking about prenatal yoga, and we're going to be talking about some basic modifications that you can use in your practice as soon as you know that you're pregnant. We're going to be talking about the different trimesters and what modifications you want to consider for those 3 trimesters. We're not really going to be getting into the postpartum period so much, but I do have another podcast where I talk extensively about baby and me, postnatal yoga really. So I'll link below to that podcast episode. We're going to be diving into all the intricacies of prenatal yoga modifications so that you know which modifications are important to follow, which are maybe not quite as important. So let's get started. Okay, so basic prenatal yoga modifications. Before I get into the details, I just want to say that everything that I say, know that you are still your own teacher. Your body is your own teacher. You know your body better than I do, way better than I do, and way better than any yoga teacher possibly could. So that wisdom that you have inside is really going to guide your yoga practice. I'm going to be presenting these yoga modifications from a bit of a beginner's-ish standpoint, but I'm still going to make them so that you may want to have a little bit of familiarity with the yoga practice. So if you've never ever done yoga before, you might want to check out some beginner's yoga videos just so that you know some of the things that I'm talking about, because I'm not going to be demoing things here in this podcast today. But great idea for a future yoga episode. So first modification that I want to mention is kind of maybe the most obvious one. It's to not lie on the belly during a yoga class. Now, you can still lie on your belly during the first trimester. Many people do, but for many people, even at the beginning of the pregnancy, it can feel a little bit crampy and uncomfortable to lie flat on the belly for yoga poses. So, if you're about 8 weeks or less, and it feels good to still go down onto the belly and practice cobra pose, lifting the heart space and things like that, that places pressure on the belly, know that that is still okay if your body feels okay doing that. But for many people, as I said, even in the first trimester, that can be a little bit uncomfortable. So in the first trimester, that's kind of up to your own discretion whether or not you want to be doing yoga poses flat on the belly. But definitely starting the second trimester-ish onward, that's when you want to be avoiding going directly down onto the belly, because you're going to be having this big belly in the way and it's just going to be kind of uncomfortable to do so. Second yoga modification that I want to get into is, let's see, what do I want to do next? Twisting. So twisting, there are a lot of myths around this in the yoga community. So a lot of people say that you cannot do any closed twists at all during pregnancy. Closed twists meaning taking the knee into the belly and then twisting in the direction of the knee. A lot of people say instead of doing closed twists around the knee, do open twists instead in the opposite direction of the knee. All of that is fine, and all of that, if you practice that during your pregnancy, sure, it is safe, it is good. You can follow those guidelines. The way that I was taught is that you can still do maybe a little bit more twisting than the traditional, maybe a little bit more conservative yoga guidelines have said in the past. So you can even still do a little bit of closed twisting, but your belly will tell you when to stop. When you've got that growing bump going on, you're just not going to have much room to twist. So while twisting in the direction of a closed twist is okay, you just don't want to overdo it, and your body will tell you before you overdo it. That being said, I think a lot of people do avoid twisting at all during pregnancy because they're so afraid it's going to hurt the baby. But it is important that we do still incorporate some twisting into the body because the spine moves in only 4 directions: flexion, extension, side bending, and twisting. Those are the 4 directions that the spine moves. And it's important to move the spine each of those directions regularly. It's just important for spinal health. That is true during pregnancy as well. So including some twists is important. Including deep twists is not so good. But you just want to be, again, using your own body's wisdom, using your own discretion as you take those twisting postures. Third prenatal yoga modification that you want to consider is lying on the back. So early on in the pregnancy, lying on the back is completely fine. But once the belly starts to grow, lying down on your back starts to place a lot of weight and pressure on the back of kind of that abdominal space, on the veins and arteries, on specifically the vena cava. So it places pressure on those veins and arteries, and by doing so, it kind of restricts blood flow to important parts of the body. So you kind of want to avoid being on the back for too long, but again, your body will kind of tell you when it becomes uncomfortable, and a lot of people can't spend even a few seconds at all on their back before getting a little bit dizzy. So if that's the case, then don't spend any time at all on your back. But it is still okay to go onto your back occasionally, even through the end of pregnancy, as long as you're not hanging out there, sleeping there, doing a lot of things there. If you want to be lying on your back for some of the more active yoga postures, that is perfectly fine. So bridging, doing a little bit of happy baby, because a lot of people do end up pushing baby out on their back. And while that may not be the quickest or the way that uses gravity the most efficiently to push baby out, the fact is a lot of people do end up pushing baby out on the back. So even spending like a tiny bit of time there, if not for an extended amount of time, but practicing rolling onto the back and rolling to the side, can keep you mobile for labor when you may be there for some amount of time. Fourth prenatal yoga modification is forward folds. Now, forward folds you can practice through the entire duration of your pregnancy up until the very end. But again, it's kind of like that deep twisting. You don't want to fold too deeply because folding deeply can compress the belly, just like twisting, as I said. And this is kind of one of those things where your body is going to tell you when it becomes uncomfortable. So you can absolutely forward fold, but you'll want to invite a little more space into your forward folds. So if you were super bendy before pregnancy and could touch your toes, now you're probably not going to be able to touch your toes. A lot of people struggle to put their shoes on and socks on towards the end of pregnancy, and that is okay. But even practicing forward folding and practicing it with a little bit of a bend in the knees can help you to stay mobile, to do those things like put shoes on, touch toes, all of that. put socks on towards the end of pregnancy. So it can be helpful for day-to-day life. But you don't want to be folding so deeply that you are compressing the belly, as I said. I don't know what number we're on. I think we're on 5th now, 6th. The next prenatal yoga modification that I want to get into is inversions. So this is another controversial one. Some people say no inversions at all during pregnancy. And an inversion, when I say that, I mean moving into a position where your head is below your heart. So a lot of yoga postures, if you think about it that way, are inversions. Downward facing dog is an inversion. A standing forward fold, that's an inversion, as are more challenging inversions like handstand, forearm balance, all of those things. So because inversions, it's just such a wide spectrum of what is actually happening in the body and level of challenge and things like that, I don't think it's a good rule to say all inversions are off the table. However, some inversions do become extremely uncomfortable during pregnancy. If you have a stable, steady handstanding practice, you can kind of continue that during pregnancy for the most part until your body tells you to stop. I know with my first baby, I was handstanding a lot before I got pregnant, and I think I kept handstanding until about halfway through the pregnancy and was completely fine, but that's because I had a very regular handstanding practice before I became pregnant. But again, your body will kind of tell you what is comfortable and what is not serving. Legs up the wall is one of those kind of beginner-friendly poses that is really nice to do towards the middle of pregnancy before it becomes uncomfortable to lie flat on your back. And it's a really good pose to do because swelling and edema in the feet can be really common towards the end of pregnancy. So lying in legs up the wall can be really helpful to allow some of those fluids to come down the body and to be filtered out. So legs up the wall is really, really helpful as long as you feel comfortable in it. Some people feel comfortable in legs up the wall through the duration of the pregnancy. And as I said, some people get really dizzy when they're down on their back for any amount of time. So it's one of those things where if you feel good doing it, listen to your body. If you don't feel good, listen to your body as well. But you can also kind of get into a side lying version of legs up the wall where you're not lying flat on your back. So if being flat on your back is uncomfortable, then doing it side lying, just lying on your side close enough to a wall so that you can extend one leg up the wall can be a helpful alternative if that lying on your back position is really uncomfortable. So inversions are not off the table. They do become more challenging towards the end of pregnancy, but even things like downward facing dog, which can feel great earlier on in the pregnancy, but can just get really challenging because you're carrying a lot of weight and it becomes hard to sustain those more challenging positions, and blood pressure stuff comes up. Some people have more elevated blood pressure towards the end of pregnancy. Some people, their blood pressure dip towards the middle of pregnancy. I've had both of those experiences with my 2 different pregnancies. So inversions were really uncomfortable towards the middle of my first pregnancy and really uncomfortable towards the end of my second pregnancy because of high and low blood pressure. So again, just kind of getting into what feels good in the body and what doesn't feel so good is super important here. The last category of modifications that I want to include here is breath work. A lot of people will say, don't do any breath work when you go to a yoga class if you're pregnant. I think you should still do some breath work because breathing is so important to both labor and to pushing the baby out. So practicing some forms of breath work is really, really important. However, there are some forms of breath work that do compress the belly, do cinch the abdomen in, and do really not make space for the baby in the way that we like to during pregnancy. So things like Kapalabhati, which is short, sharp, forceful exhalations, that would be off the table. Things like Uddiyana Bandha, which is really forcefully pushing all the breath out and then sucking the belly in. Of course, that is off the table as well. Anything that makes you dizzy or lightheaded, that is off the table, even if it's just simple diaphragmatic breathing. But things that you probably do want to include if it feels good, diaphragmatic breathing is okay for most bodies. And just simply watching the breath awareness can be really helpful for a lot of bodies. Things like Nadi Shodhana, or alternate nostril breathing, where you're moving the breath from one side to the other, that can be okay for most bodies. But again, if you become dizzy or lightheaded with any of the breath work, it's a sign immediately to stop, because pregnancy isn't necessarily something you would think of as like big changes to the breath necessarily, but it is. There's a lot going on in the body. Blood circulation is expanding immensely, and because of that, the breath changes. So you really have to listen to your body there. Okay, I said that was the last, but there's one more category that I just remembered that I want to include also, and that is core work. So a lot of people say do not do any core work at all during pregnancy. I don't agree with that either. I think some core work in moderation is important. However, the type of core work that you are doing really, really matters here. So there are several different layers of the abdomen. There's the rectus abdominis, which is the superficial six-pack muscles. And then there's the internal external obliques. And then there's the transverse abdominis, which is that deepest layer of the core. When you are pushing a baby out, you're using the transverse abdominis. So it is important that you still keep those muscles healthy and strong, because you're going to be you're really going to be recruiting them to do something that is possibly more intense than you've ever done in your life. So continuing to work them in a safe, supportive way is important. However, it's really difficult to find abdominal exercises that do not recruit the rectus abdominis so much when you're in an all levels group fitness type of situation. So most of the things that you would be doing in group kind of core classes would probably be off the table. Planks, crunches, all of those things, they cinch the belly in a way that's not really helpful during pregnancy. And also, because they're working the rectus abdominis so much, they can actually accentuate diastasis recti, which is that natural separation of those more superficial core muscles that occurs for most bodies during pregnancy. But if that superficial separation of the abdomen happens a lot, then it can be more difficult for healing. So if you're constantly working that rectus abdominis during pregnancy, it's more likely that that gap between the abs is going to be bigger, it's going to be uncomfortable, and then it's going to take longer to heal and probably require some pelvic floor PT work. So things that you want to be doing instead of planks and crunches and all of those things, the simplest way to start working the core in a safe way is just diaphragmatic breathing. So just watching the breath in the belly and watching the belly gently expand and soften. That is a great place to start. A little more intense is being on hands and knees and doing bird dog. That's extending one arm and the opposite leg. And if you do that and you notice any coning or doming of the abdomen, if it goes from anything other than that smooth rounded brace to kind of looking like a pointed shape, then you know that you are overworking the abdomen and you should take it down a level or two with any type of core work. So that's really it for prenatal modifications. That's kind of a general overview, but as I said, you really, really, really want to listen to your body and you want to check in with your medical provider if you have any questions at all about any of the things that I mentioned. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to dive deeper into prenatal yoga, then please do sign up for my upcoming 3-4 hour workshop next month. It's in February and it's at Karandala Yoga. If you are in the St. Louis area, it's all about yoga and pregnancy. So I really hope to see you there if you are local. If not, check out the rest of my videos on my Coffee Witching Hour podcast, and please do subscribe and like the content as well. I hope to see you all next time. Let me know if there are topics that you want to cover. Otherwise, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your next week or so until I see you next. All right, see you next time.